While the origins of punishment are impossible to trace, historical records indicate that it was a well-established social institution even among primitive societies. Without a doubt, public opinion about crime and punishments has changed tremendously over millennia. What has caused this paradigm shift? This Liber-Tea episode will be looking at the evolution of punishment. If you enjoy true crime, please visit our sister channel, Crime Labs, here. Generally, in the course of millennia, societies have shifted from family or personal justice vengeful acts, including blood feuds and lynching, and the practice of an eye for an eye, to systems based on orderly processes and written codes. Consequently, prisons and jails have been transformed from places where prisoners awaited maiming, execution, whippings, and deportation. In the U.S., for example, according to the Supreme Court, punishment serves four purposes: incapacitation, deterrence, retribution, and social rehabilitation. Incapacitation is utilized by criminal justice systems to incarcerate those offenders who cannot be reformed. This also helps to secure public safety. During ancient times, most jurisdictions allowed a family member or the victim of a crime to deliver justice. Generally, offenders fled to their respective families for protection, resulting in blood feuds. There are times when the family of the offender reiterated by striking back at the victim's family. This could continue until both families were ruined completely. As societies morphed into villages and tribes, the duty to punish wrongdoers fell upon local communities. For example, a community would excommunicate a person for certain wrongful acts. Punishments given were always brutal. Depending on the offense, it was possible for the condemned to be burnt at stake, maimed, or boiled in oil. The invention of writing in Mesopotamia led to the codification of laws. The first written constitution was promulgated in circa 1750 BCE by King Hammurabi of Babylon. This set of written laws, popularly known as the Code of Hammurabi, originated the eye for an eye doctrine. Thousands of years later, Emperor Justinian of the Eastern Roman Empire promulgated the Justinian Code. As civilization developed, huge landowners and later rulers began to demand orderly legal proceedings as opposed to blood feuds. This demand resulted in the formation of courts. Courts had wide discretion regarding the punishments that they would give. For instance, a court would sentence an offender to several years of slavery to the victim's family as restitution. A court could also banish, sentence a person to hard labor on public projects, or even sentence them to death. Medieval Europe was notorious for cruel punishments. Executions were always preceded by torture, and cruel instruments were used to this effect. For instance, the rack was used to stretch offenders until their bodies were torn apart. Generally, during this period, the punishment was conducted publicly, and people were often invited to witness executions, whippings, and maimings. Medieval prisons were cold, damp, filthy roach and rat-infested places where prisoners were required to buy food, mattresses, blankets, and even the change they were bound with. Wealthy prisoners were able to pay for the luxuries, while poor prisoners languished in filth. Often, prisoners succumbed to malnutrition, diseases, starvation, and victimization by guards and fellow prisoners. During the 1500s, debtors' prisons and workhouses developed as sources of cheap labor and places where minor offenders and mentally ill people were confined. Additionally, in countries like England, rather than execute capital offenders, they were ferried to places like Australia and colonial Georgia in the U.S. Although this was less severe than beheadings and other forms of execution, the majority of prisoners who were transported to these places died because of the harsh environment there. Some even died on board the ships that transported them. Physical punishment was also common in colonial America. Colonists utilized pillories, branding, whipping, stocks, and maiming across wrongdoers. Executions also occurred frequently. Per the Massachusetts Bay Colony, 13 criminal offenses attracted a mandatory death sentence. These criminal activities included witchcraft, murder, and idol worship. In New Amsterdam, present-day New York, most criminal activities, including pickpocketing, robbery, and horse stealing, were capital offenses. Colonial American jails and prisons were used to hold prisoners who were awaiting execution, sentencing, or as debtors' prisons. According to Puritans, humans were naturally depraved individuals who required harsh punishments to deter and incapacitate them from engaging in evil activities. The Quakers, under the leadership of William Penn, did not prefer harsh punishments for wrongdoers. This practice made colonial Pennsylvania stand out from other colonies. Pennsylvania's early criminal codes outlawed execution for all crimes except murder. Additionally, they replaced physical punishments with hard labor and imprisonment. Lastly, they did not charge prisoners for the necessities they were provided in prison. After the French Revolution, which was based on the ideas of the Age of Reason, many European nations abolished torture and insisted that punishment should fit the crime committed, rather than having the infliction of pain being the main element of correction. However, despite these advancements in the European criminal justice system, the French Revolution introduced the guillotine. Despite the many reforms that occurred through the 20th century, many people preferred that prisoners foot their bills. As such, prisons construct their industries and employ prisoners. Prisoners in rural areas use prisoners to cultivate prison lands. In the U.S., in some parts of the South, prisoners were leased out to plantation owners as laborers. Prison authorities justified hard labor as a way of instilling the value of hard work to offenders, as many free citizens engaged in the same to provide food, shelter, and clothing for their families. However, some penologists believe that the harshness of prisons causes the inmates to become more vindictive rather than rehabilitated. The rise of labor unions in the 1930s led to the decline of many prison industries in the U.S. By 1999, under zero tolerance to crime policies and the war on drugs, there was a tremendous increase in the number of people in prisons. Many people argued that by imprisoning many offenders, society would experience a decrease in crime rates. Unfortunately, the number of individuals in prisons and on parole continues to tax the system heavily. Today, according to surveys conducted across the U.S., over 50% of people view prison as punishment, while 20% view prisons as rehabilitation centers. The remaining percentage view prison as an institution that should deter and prevent crime. The forms of punishment that offenders are subjected to across the world are more humane compared to yesteryears. However, there are still societies that practice harsh punishments, including honor killings and maiming today. The biggest change in how society deals with offenders today is the type of punishment that is sanctioned under the law. Criminal justice systems no longer punish offenders by publicly mutilating, flogging, or executing them. Punishment has evolved from being cruel to ethical. Today, punishment is focused more on reform and rehabilitation. Correctional departments around the world endeavor to bestow upon convicts skills and education that will help them become better people in the future. If you enjoy true crime, please visit our sister channel, Crime Labs, here.